Have you been a good investment to your organization? How do you know? How are you measuring the return on investment you are giving your organization? Welcome to Great Transition Strategies Monday Morning Stand-Up. 5 minutes to get your week off to a great start and potentially give you something to help make you a more effective leader so you can love what you do. In the business world, we're all about return on investment. What is the contribution that you are giving back to your organization? Can you measure it? If you're in a for-profit organization and you are in sales, you're in marketing, you're in BD, business development, you can probably measure it because there's some numbers that you're chasing. What about other areas? Let's take a look at, and what if you're in a nonprofit? What if you're in a nonprofit or an overhead position? Let's look at ways to measure your ROI, your return on investment, to your organization. First, what's ROI? Return on investment. If you have invested, it's the return on some kind of investment. You've invested 100K, you get back 10K growth out of it, that's a 10% return on investment. So how do you measure that in the workplace? Let's take a look at putting that formula together. You get hired year one. What has the company invested in you year one? 100K salary, let's just use that for an example. Well, there's some benefits on there too. 401K, health benefits, time off. They had to hire you. They spent some time hiring you. It cost them some money to do that. On top of that, they onboarded you. You had 2 weeks of non-productivity. That's a cost. And they invested in you. You went to a conference, they used some education. So maybe to bring you on board for a 100K job, they spent 150K. Luckily, you're in a position where you know how much your team produced. You have P&L responsibility, and you know you increased the bottom line by 15K. 15K of production, over 150K investment, 10% ROI. Good for you. You know how to measure it. It's easy for you to measure that. But what if you're in a position where you're overhead or you're a nonprofit? Now, how do you measure it? I work with individuals, and the reason we'll do this, I'll work with them because they want to understand the impact that they are making on their organization, and you want a way to measure it. The denominator is easy. You could always measure year one, year two, year three, or you can measure it cumulatively. But now, how are you going to measure it if you're in that nonprofit? Find a numerator that makes a difference to that organization. For instance, you're in a nonprofit. What's important? What is important to your organization? It might be number of members gained. It might be hours served, number of constituents served, number of activities that you've had, number of places where you've served, what you have given, what's the impact? In the numerator, find a specific number, find a specific event that's important to your organization so you can measure it. Now you know, constituents served per whatever it was. Now you have a good ratio. I always think it's important to have these metrics so you can measure your growth and the growth of your team. Now you know the track that you're on and the trajectory where you're going. You're measuring something. Folks use this, particularly when they leave organizations, this becomes part of their resume. In this organization for 5 years, I have done this kind of growth, and you can show that growth. You're working with your leadership, showing your growth, right? Suppose you're in an overhead position, HR, maybe facilities, chief of staff. Suppose you have a chief of staff that, what's important? What do you need in the numerator? What's important to that VP? Well, there's one VP that I had an individual working with. She wanted to increase her engagement with constituents external to the organization, constituents and stakeholders external to the organization. As a chief of staff, the individual I was working with drove policy procedures to have directors running what's internal and increase the overall engagement of that VP externally. Measuring number of meetings, number of hours, number of days, meeting with those individuals. That was the metric that was important to that VP. That was the metric that chief of staff put together to measure. You and your organization, what is important to your organization? That's the numerator. What's a metric that needs to be measured? And for you, it's easy to figure out what investment they're making in you. It's also interesting when you bring in all the things that they do and see, hey, they're really investing some money in me to do what I'm doing here. ROI, what's the contribution you're making back to your organization? Do you know it? Are you measuring it? are you using it? Thanks for listening. See you next Monday morning, 8:30. Have a great week.